I was standing in my front yard with a bag of seed potatoes when the police cruiser pulled up, and I knew immediately that Brenda from the HOA had finally lost her mind. The officer stepped out of his vehicle with that practiced neutral expression they all seemed to master, clipboard in hand, and I could see Brenda herself peering out from behind her living room curtains 3 houses down. My name is Frank Morrison, and I have lived in the Meadowbrook subdivision in Columbus, Ohio, for the past 8 years without a single problem until 6 months ago when Brenda Patterson took over as president of our homeowners association. Since then, my life had become an endless parade of violation notices, angry phone calls, and now apparently police visits over gardening. The officer approached slowly, his eyes scanning my front yard where I had set up 3 large wooden planter boxes. They were neat, well constructed, and positioned carefully on my property at least 15 feet back from the sidewalk. Inside them, rich dark soil waited for the seed potatoes I had been about to plant when his cruiser appeared. "Good morning, sir," the officer said, his tone professional but not hostile. "I'm Officer Rodriguez. We received a complaint about unauthorized agricultural operations on residential property. Are you the homeowner here?" I set down my bag of seed potatoes and wiped my hands on my jeans. "Yes, officer, Frank Morrison. And I'm guessing Brenda Patterson called you." Officer Rodriguez glanced at his notes. "The complaint was filed by the president of the Meadowbrook HOA, yes. She claims you're running an illegal farm in a residential zone and violating multiple HOA covenants." I could not help but laugh, though there was no humor in it. "Officer, I'm planting potatoes in 3 planter boxes. Does this look like a farm to you?" He surveyed the yard again, and I could see him taking in the modest scope of my setup. My house sat on a standard 1/4-acre lot. The 3 planters took up maybe 60 square feet total. The rest of my lawn was neatly mowed, my flower beds were maintained, and everything looked perfectly suburban except for these 3 wooden boxes. "Can you tell me what you're doing with these planters?" Officer Rodriguez asked, his pen poised over his clipboard. "I'm growing potatoes to donate to the local food pantry network," I explained. "I've been coordinating with the Franklin County Food Initiative. They connected me with 3 food pantries that serve this area, and I committed to growing fresh produce for them. Potatoes are easy to grow, store well, and provide good nutrition. I figured I could probably harvest about 200 pounds from these planters over the growing season." The officer wrote something down. "Do you have documentation of this arrangement?" "Absolutely. Hold on." I pulled out my phone and opened my email app. "Here's my correspondence with Janet Holloway from the Franklin County Food Initiative. And here are emails from the pantries themselves thanking me for participating in their urban agriculture program." Officer Rodriguez reviewed the emails, scrolling through several messages. His expression softened slightly. "This looks legitimate. Have you had issues with the HOA before about this?" "You have no idea," I muttered. "Brenda has sent me 8 violation notices in the past month alone. She says the planters are unsightly, that they violate the landscaping standards, that I'm running a business without proper zoning, and now apparently that I'm operating an illegal farm. I've responded to every single notice explaining what I'm doing and why. I even invited her to come look at the setup herself, but she refused." The officer nodded slowly. "I'm going to be straight with you, Mr. Morrison. This doesn't look like anything that requires police involvement. You're not violating any city ordinances that I can see. The planters are on your property, they're not blocking any public access, and you're not selling anything. The HOA stuff is a civil matter between you and the association." I'll file my report saying there's no criminal activity here, but I can't help you with the HOA dispute. I understand, officer. Thank you for being reasonable about this. After Officer Rodriguez left, I stood there staring at those empty planters and feeling my frustration build. This was supposed to be a good thing. I had wanted to do something meaningful for my community, something that would help people who were struggling to put food on their tables. Instead, I was being treated like a criminal by my own neighbors. My phone buzzed. Another email from Brenda, sent to my address, and she said to the entire HOA board. The subject line read, "Urgent, continued violations at 847 Maple Drive." I opened it against my better judgment. To whom it may concern, despite multiple warnings and now police involvement, Frank Morrison continues to flagrantly disregard our community standards with his unsightly agricultural installation. This sets a dangerous precedent. If we allow one homeowner to turn their yard into a farm, what's next? Chicken coops, goat pens. We must take decisive action to preserve property values and maintain the character of Meadowbrook. I am calling an emergency board meeting for this Thursday at 7 p.m. to discuss legal action against Mr. Morrison. All board members are expected to attend. I had heard enough. I forwarded the entire email chain to my lawyer, Tom Fletcher, who had helped me with my home purchase years ago. Then I called the Franklin County Agricultural Department, because I remembered seeing something about urban agriculture protections when I had been researching this project months ago. The woman who answered was named Patricia, and she listened patiently as I explained my situation. "Let me transfer you to our urban agriculture coordinator," she said. "This is exactly the kind of thing David handles." David Martinez came on the line a moment later, and his voice was warm and encouraging. "Mr. Morrison, you're doing exactly the kind of work we try to promote in Franklin County. We have several ordinances that protect small-scale food production for charitable purposes. Can you tell me about your HOA's specific complaints?" I walked him through the entire situation, from Brenda's first violation notice to this morning's police visit. David asked detailed questions about the size of my planters, their construction, what I was growing, and my relationship with the food pantries. "This is clear-cut," David said finally. "You're protected under Ohio Revised Code Section 519.21, which limits HOA restrictions on vegetable gardens, and also under our county's Urban Agriculture Initiative that we passed 2 years ago. Since you're growing food specifically for donation to registered food assistance programs, you have even stronger protections. The HOA cannot prohibit this activity, and they definitely cannot fine you for it." Relief washed over me. "So what do I do? They're threatening legal action." "Let them," David said, and I could hear the smile in his voice. "But I'll do you one better. I'm going to send an official letter from the Agricultural Department to your HOA explaining the applicable laws and your protections. I'll also note that harassment of participants in food security programs could result in county sanctions. That should get their attention." "Thank you," I said, meaning it deeply. "I just want to grow some vegetables and help people. I don't understand why that's so threatening to Brenda." "Some people see change as a threat, even when that change is positive," David replied. "Give me your HOA president's contact information and the board members if you have them. I'll get that letter out today." After hanging up, I finally planted my seed potatoes. The afternoon sun was warm on my back as I worked, carefully spacing each seed piece and covering it with soil. My neighbor to the left, an older man named George, came over to watch. "Heard you had some excitement this morning," George said. He was retired, spent most of his days puttering in his own garden, and had always been friendly. Brenda called the cops on me for planting potatoes. George shook his head. That woman has too much time on her hands. My wife and I think what you're doing is great. We were talking about it last week, actually. The food pantry at our church is always running low on fresh produce. Everything they get is usually canned or processed. That's exactly why I wanted to do this, I said, patting down the soil over another seed potato. Fresh vegetables make such a difference in people's diets, but they're expensive and they don't last long. Food pantries struggle to keep them in stock. If those of us with yards and time can grow some extra, it helps. You know, George said thoughtfully, I've got those raised beds in my backyard that I'm not using anymore. My knees aren't what they used to be. You're welcome to plant in them if it would help your project. I straightened up, surprised. Really? That would be amazing, George. Are you sure? Absolutely. If Brenda has a problem with it, she can take it up with me. I've been in this neighborhood 20 years longer than she has. Besides, they're in my backyard. She'll never even see them. We shook on it, and I felt my spirits lift. Despite Brenda's hostility, there were good people in this neighborhood who understood what I was trying to do. The emergency HOA meeting arrived on Thursday evening. I had received the official notice via certified mail, which seemed excessive for a meeting that would take place less than a week after the notice was sent. The meeting was held in the community clubhouse, a small building near the subdivision entrance that mostly sat empty except for monthly board meetings and the occasional baby shower. I arrived 15 minutes early and found I was not the only non-board member in attendance. At least a dozen other residents had shown up, including George and his wife Martha. There was also Susan Kelly, a single mother who lived 2 streets over and who I had spoken with a few times at community events. She gave me an encouraging nod when I sat down. Brenda swept in at exactly 7 p.m., followed by the other board members. There was Richard Chen, the vice president, a nervous-looking accountant who always seemed uncomfortable with confrontation. The secretary was Dorothy Mills, a retired teacher who kept meticulous notes but rarely spoke up. The treasurer was Kevin Santos, a younger guy who worked in tech and seemed perpetually confused about why he had volunteered for HOA duty. "This meeting will come to order," Brenda announced, sitting at the front table and arranging her papers with sharp, precise movements. She was exactly what you would picture when someone said, HOA president, middle-aged with an aggressively practical haircut and an expression that suggested she had never experienced joy. She wore a blazer despite the warm evening, and her reading glasses hung on a chain around her neck. "We're here to address an ongoing violation of our community covenants by Mr. Frank Morrison of 847 Maple Drive," Brenda began, looking directly at me with obvious disdain. Despite numerous warnings, Mr. Morrison has installed agricultural equipment on his front lawn in direct violation of Section 7.3 of our covenants, which states that front yards must be maintained primarily in lawn or approved ornamental plantings. I raised my hand. "Can I respond to that?" "You'll have an opportunity to speak when I'm finished," Brenda snapped. "As I was saying, this violation has persisted for over a month. The structures in question are unsightly wooden boxes filled with dirt, hardly the aesthetic we're trying to maintain in Meadowbrook. Furthermore, Mr. Morrison claims to be growing food for commercial purposes, which would require business permits he does not possess." "That's not true," I interrupted, unable to stay quiet. "I'm growing food for donation, not for sale. There's a huge difference." Brenda's eyes flashed. "You're out of order, Mr. Morrison." Susan Kelly stood up from her seat. "Actually, Brenda, I think Frank should be allowed to defend himself. You're making some pretty serious accusations." This is not a trial, Susan. This is a board meeting to discuss covenant enforcement. Then why did you tell half the neighborhood to show up? George called out from the back. Several people murmured in agreement. Brenda looked flustered for the first time. This is a matter of community concern. Now, as I was attempting to say before being interrupted, the board needs to vote on pursuing legal action to compel Mr. Morrison to remove these structures and pay accumulated fines for the violation period. Richard Chen cleared his throat. Brenda, before we vote, I think we should hear what Frank has to say. And I actually got a letter today from the county. Did anyone else get one? He held up an official-looking envelope. Brenda's face went pale, then red. That letter is the county overstepping its authority. We are a private organization with the right to enforce our covenants. Can I see that letter? I asked Richard. He passed it down to me, and I read through it quickly. David Martinez had done exactly what he promised. The letter, on official Franklin County Agricultural Department letterhead, explained Ohio's cottage food and urban agriculture laws in detail. It specifically cited the protections for small-scale vegetable production and noted that food grown for charitable donation fell under expanded protections. The letter concluded with a polite but firm statement that HOA covenants could not supersede state and county agricultural policies, and that harassment of program participants could result in the HOA losing access to certain county services and potentially facing legal consequences. This letter says the HOA legally cannot stop me, I said, holding it up. The state and county have laws protecting exactly what I'm doing. Those laws are for actual farms, not residential properties, Brenda argued, but her voice had lost some of its certainty. That's not what it says. It specifically mentions residential properties and urban agriculture programs. I'm a registered participant in the Franklin County Food Initiative. I have all the documentation. Dorothy Mills, the secretary, spoke up for the first time. Brenda, if the county is saying we can't enforce this, maybe we should reconsider. I don't want the HOA to face legal trouble. We won't face legal trouble for enforcing our own covenants, Brenda insisted, but she was clearly rattled. Kevin Santos, the treasurer, was reading something on his phone. Actually, I'm looking at Ohio Revised Code Section 519.21 right now. It says HOAs cannot prohibit vegetable gardens on residential properties. We could maybe restrict the location or size, but we can't ban them entirely. Those boxes are ugly, Brenda said, her argument clearly falling apart. They look like something from a farm, not a suburban home. They're neat and well-maintained, George countered. I've seen plenty of ornamental planter boxes in this neighborhood that look basically the same. The only difference is Frank is growing food instead of petunias. It sets a precedent, Brenda tried again. If we allow this, everyone will want to start farming their yards. Susan Kelly laughed. And that would be bad because. Brenda, do you have any idea how many families in this neighborhood struggle with food costs? If more people grew vegetables and shared them, that would be wonderful. Property values, Brenda said desperately. This will hurt our property values. No, it won't, Richard said, and everyone turned to look at him in surprise. He rarely contradicted Brenda. I'm an accountant. I pulled comps for our neighborhood last week because I'm thinking of refinancing. Our property values are stable and actually slightly above similar neighborhoods in the area. One person growing vegetables in neat planters isn't going to crash the market. I decided it was time to make my full case. I stood up and addressed the room. I understand the HOA has a responsibility to maintain community standards. I'm not trying to undermine that. But what I'm doing is legal. It's beneficial to people in need, and it's not harming anyone. Those planters are clean, well-built, and positioned on my property in a way that doesn't interfere with anyone else. The potatoes I grow will go directly to food pantries that serve families right here in Columbus. Some of those families might even be in this room or in this neighborhood. A woman I did not recognize spoke up. I've been using the food pantry at Grace Methodist for the past 3 months since I lost my job. Getting fresh vegetables instead of just canned corn and beans makes a real difference for my kids. If Frank is helping supply those pantries, I think we should be thanking him, not threatening him. Several people applauded. Brenda looked around the room with growing horror as she realized she was losing control of the meeting. "This is irregular," she said. "The board needs to discuss this privately and vote." "Why privately?" Susan asked. "This affects all of us. We should be part of the discussion." "Fine," Brenda snapped. "All in favor of pursuing legal action against Mr. Morrison, say aye." She raised her hand and looked expectantly at the other board members. None of them moved. "Richard," Brenda prompted. "I abstain," Richard said quietly. "I think we need more information before we decide to sue someone, especially when the county is saying we might be in the wrong." "Dorothy." "I abstain as well. I'm sorry, Brenda, but I'm not comfortable voting to sue a neighbor over vegetable planters, especially when he's doing it for charity." "Kevin," the young treasurer shook his head. "Hard no from me. This seems like a waste of HOA resources, and I don't think we'd win anyway based on what that county letter says." Brenda's face was now a deep shade of red. "This is absurd. You're all letting him make a mockery of our covenants." "Maybe the covenants need updating," George suggested. "They were written 20 years ago. Times change. Maybe we should have a provision specifically allowing vegetable gardens." "That's actually not a bad idea," Richard said, warming to the concept. "We could set reasonable guidelines, size limits, maintenance standards, things like that. But allow people to grow food if they want to." "I will not support rewriting our covenants to accommodate one person's hobby," Brenda said coldly. "It's not just about Frank, though," Susan pointed out. "I'd love to grow tomatoes. My daughter is doing a school project about where food comes from." "We were going to plant a small garden, but I was afraid the HOA would fine me." Several other people chimed in with similar sentiments. The meeting had completely escaped Brenda's control and turned into a broader discussion about community gardening and food production. After another 30 minutes of discussion, Richard formally moved to table any legal action against me and to form a committee to research updating the covenants regarding vegetable gardens. Dorothy seconded. The motion passed 3-1, with only Brenda voting against it. "This meeting is adjourned," Brenda said icily, gathering her papers and stalking out. I left the clubhouse feeling vindicated but also aware that this was not over. Brenda had been publicly humiliated, and people like her did not forget things like that. George walked out with me. "You handled that well," he said. "But watch yourself. Brenda's the type to hold a grudge." "I'm not worried," I replied, though in retrospect I probably should have been. The next few weeks were blissfully quiet. My potato plants sprouted and began growing vigorously. I also planted tomatoes, peppers, and squash in George's raised beds, and he enjoyed watching them grow, often sitting in a lawn chair nearby and offering commentary on their progress. The Franklin County Food Initiative sent a photographer out to take pictures of my garden for their newsletter, which featured a nice article about suburban residents contributing to food security. I thought maybe the situation with Brenda had resolved itself. I was wrong. It started with small things. My trash cans were cited for being visible from the street, even though they were in the same spot they had been for 8 years. I got a violation notice about a small patch of clover in my lawn, claiming it violated weed policies. Another notice cited me for parking my car on the street overnight when I had people over for dinner, something that had never been enforced before in our neighborhood. I responded to each notice carefully, documenting everything and keeping my tone professional. But it was clear Brenda was retaliating through death by 1,000 cuts, trying to bury me in minor violations and paperwork. Then things escalated. I came home from work one evening in late June to find 2 of my planter boxes had been vandalized. The plants had been torn out, soil scattered across my lawn, and the wooden sides of the planters kicked in. I was furious. I immediately called the police and filed a report. Officer Rodriguez came out again and he recognized me. "The potato planters," he said, shaking his head. "Someone really has it out for you." "I know exactly who," I said. "The HOA president lives 3 houses down. She's been harassing me for months about these planters." "Do you have any proof she did this?" "No direct proof, but the circumstantial evidence is pretty strong." Officer Rodriguez took photos and wrote up a report, but he was honest with me. "Without witnesses or video footage, there's not much we can do. This is property damage, so it's a misdemeanor. You could try to press charges if you find out who did it, but right now we don't have enough to pursue it." After he left, I stood looking at the destruction and trying to decide what to do. George came over, saw what had happened, and immediately offered to help me repair the damage. "This is ridiculous," he said angrily. "Someone needs to put a stop to Brenda. I need proof it was her first." "Then get cameras," George suggested. "They're cheap now. Set up a few around your property. If she or someone she hired tries something again, you'll have evidence." It was good advice. I ordered 3 outdoor security cameras that night and had them installed by the weekend. They covered my front yard, both sides of the house, and George's backyard where the other planters were located. The cameras fed to an app on my phone with motion detection alerts. I replanted the destroyed potatoes, though I had lost several weeks of growth. The plants that had been pulled up were too damaged to save. I documented the losses carefully and sent a report to Janet Holloway at the Food Initiative, explaining what had happened. She was sympathetic and angry on my behalf. "This is unconscionable," she wrote back. "You're volunteering your time and resources to help feed people in need, and someone is sabotaging you. Please let me know if there's anything we can do to help." The cameras proved their worth 2 weeks later. I was at work when my phone started buzzing with motion alerts from the front yard camera. I pulled up the live feed and watched in disbelief as Brenda herself walked up to my planters, carrying a bottle of what looked like weed killer. I immediately started screen recording on my phone as Brenda began spraying my plants. She was not subtle about it, dousing the potato plants thoroughly and moving on to some tomato plants I had in pots near my front door. The footage was crystal clear, showing her face, the bottle in her hand, and the deliberate nature of her actions. I called the police while simultaneously saving the footage to my cloud storage. This is Frank Morrison at 847 Maple Drive. I'm watching someone vandalize my property on my security camera right now. She's poisoning my plants. The dispatcher took my information and assured me an officer was being sent. I then called my lawyer, Tom Fletcher, and told him what was happening. "Save that footage," Tom said immediately. "Make multiple copies. That's criminal mischief at minimum, possibly more depending on the value of the damage and what she sprayed. This could also support a civil harassment case." By the time I raced home from work, 2 police cars were in front of my house and Brenda was sitting in the back of one, looking shocked and defiant at the same time. Officer Rodriguez was there again, along with another officer I did not recognize. "Mr. Morrison," Rodriguez said when I got out of my car, "we detained Miss Patterson based on your call. Can you show us the footage?" I pulled it up on my phone and handed it to him. Both officers watched it twice, then exchanged glances. "That's pretty conclusive," the other officer said. "Miss Patterson, you're under arrest for criminal mischief and trespassing. You have the right to remain silent." Watching Brenda get read her rights in the middle of our suburban street was surreal. Neighbors came out of their houses to watch. Susan Kelly from the HOA meeting was there, looking satisfied. George gave me a thumbs up from his porch. After they took Brenda away, Officer Rodriguez stayed to take a full statement from me. I showed him the footage from the earlier vandalism incident too, and he made notes suggesting the department might want to look at whether the cases were connected. "This is going to cause a stir in your HOA," Rodriguez commented. "The president getting arrested." "Honestly, that's the least of my concerns right now. I need to figure out if my plants can be saved." George had been watching and came over. "What did she spray?" "I don't know. Some kind of herbicide probably. Let me look." George examined the plants and the wet spots on the leaves. "Get a sample before it dries. You might need it as evidence of what chemicals she used. That could matter for the charges." I carefully collected some of the liquid in a clean jar, labeling it with the date and time. Then I did what I could to wash off the plants with water, though I was not optimistic. Sure enough, within 2 days all the plants Brenda had sprayed were dead or dying. I had lost most of my potato crop and all the tomatoes near my front door. I filed a victim impact statement with the prosecutor's office and met with an assistant district attorney named Rachel Thompson. She reviewed all my evidence, the video footage and the previous harassment issues. "This is a strong case," Rachel said. "We're charging Miss Patterson with criminal mischief in the 3rd degree and criminal trespass. Given her position as HOA president and the pattern of harassment you've documented, we're not offering a plea deal that would let her avoid a record. She caused actual financial harm to you and to the food pantries you were supplying." "What happens now?" I asked. "She'll be arraigned, probably plead not guilty, and we'll have a trial unless she changes her plea. The video evidence is compelling. I think she'll end up pleading guilty eventually, but people sometimes make poor decisions when they're embarrassed." The criminal case moved forward through the summer. Brenda hired a lawyer who tried to argue that the footage did not clearly show what she was spraying, and that maybe she had been trying to help by spraying something she thought was fertilizer. The argument was laughable given the footage showed a clear herbicide label on the bottle she was carrying. Meanwhile, the HOA fell into chaos. An emergency meeting was called to discuss Brenda's arrest and whether she should step down as president. I attended, as did what seemed like half the neighborhood. Richard Chen opened the meeting looking uncomfortable. "We're here to discuss the leadership situation. Brenda is unable to be here due to legal issues. There have been calls for her resignation." "I call for her resignation," Susan Kelly said immediately. "She's facing criminal charges for vandalizing a neighbor's property. She can't effectively lead the HOA with that hanging over her. She deserves due process," someone I did not know argued, "innocent until proven guilty." "There's video footage," George countered. "I've seen it. She's on camera poisoning Frank's plants. That's not alleged, that's documented fact." The meeting devolved into arguing about Brenda's fate. Some residents, mostly her friends, wanted to wait until after her trial. The majority wanted her out immediately. Eventually, Dorothy Mills proposed a solution. "Our bylaws allow for removal of a board member with a 2/3 vote of the full board. I move that we vote to remove Brenda Patterson as president and as a board member." Second, Kevin Santos said quickly. The vote was 3 in favor, 0 against, with Brenda obviously unable to vote on her own removal. Richard Chen was then elected as the new president, and Susan Kelly was appointed to fill the vacant board seat. One of Richard's first acts as president was to formally apologize to me on behalf of the HOA for the harassment I had endured. He also suspended all pending violations against me and established a new committee to draft updated covenants regarding gardens and food production. "We want to get this right," Richard told me after the meeting. "What happened to you was wrong on multiple levels. We should be encouraging things like community gardens and food donation, not punishing them." Things calmed down considerably after that. I replanted what I could, though it was late enough in the season that my yields would be reduced. The food pantries were understanding and grateful for whatever I could provide. George and I harvested about 150 pounds of potatoes total, along with several bushels of tomatoes and other vegetables from his raised beds. It was not the 200 pounds I had hoped for, but it was still a meaningful contribution. Brenda's criminal trial took place in October. I had to testify, which was nerve-wracking despite having the video evidence on my side. Rachel Thompson, the prosecutor, walked me through the timeline of events, the HOA harassment, and finally the day Brenda poisoned my plants. "Can you describe what you saw on the video footage?" Rachel asked. "I saw Brenda Patterson, the president of my homeowners association, walk onto my property carrying a spray bottle. She proceeded to spray my potato plants and tomato plants thoroughly. Within 2 days, all the plants she sprayed were dead." "And what was the purpose of these plants?" "I was growing them to donate to local food pantries. The potatoes and tomatoes were supposed to go to 3 different pantries that serve Franklin County, including families in my own neighborhood." Brenda's lawyer tried to create doubt during cross-examination, asking if I was certain the plants died from what she sprayed and not some other cause. I pointed out that only the plants she sprayed died, while plants 3 feet away that she did not reach were perfectly healthy. He asked if maybe she had been trying to spray something beneficial. I noted that the bottle clearly showed an herbicide label in the video footage. The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours before returning a guilty verdict on both charges. Brenda sat stony-faced as the verdict was read. Sentencing was scheduled for 3 weeks later. At the sentencing hearing, I provided a victim impact statement describing how her actions had affected not just me, but also the food pantries that had been counting on the produce. I brought letters from the pantry directors explaining the impact of fresh vegetable donations and what the loss of my contributions had meant. The judge, an older woman named Patricia Hernandez, clearly took the case seriously. "Miss Patterson, you held a position of trust in your community. Rather than using that position to foster neighborliness and cooperation, you used it to harass someone for the crime of trying to help feed hungry people. Your actions were petty, vindictive, and caused real harm not just to Mr. Morrison, but to the charitable organizations he was supporting. I'm sentencing you to 30 days in county jail, suspended pending completion of 200 hours of community service, to be performed at a food bank or food pantry of Mr. Morrison's choosing. You will also pay restitution to Mr. Morrison for the cost of replacing the destroyed plants and supplies, totaling $843, plus court costs. Additionally, you are prohibited from holding any position of authority in the Meadowbrook HOA or any other homeowners association for a period of 5 years. Brenda's face went white at the mention of working at a food pantry, but she said nothing. Her lawyer tried to argue the sentence was excessive, but Judge Hernandez was unmoved. Perhaps spending time working directly with food insecurity will give Miss Patterson some perspective on why Mr. Morrison's actions were valuable rather than threatening, the judge said. This sentence stands. After the criminal case concluded, I filed a civil lawsuit against Brenda for harassment and the additional costs I had incurred, including security cameras and lawyer fees. Tom Fletcher handled it efficiently, and faced with the criminal conviction and all the documented evidence, Brenda settled quickly for $12,000 rather than go through another trial. The money was welcome, but more important to me was the closure. Brenda had to sell her house and move out of Meadowbrook by January, unable to face the neighbors after everything that had happened. I heard through George that she moved to an apartment complex on the other side of Columbus, where there was no HOA and no community expectations at all. With new leadership, the Meadowbrook HOA underwent significant changes. The Covenant Committee drafted updated rules that explicitly allowed vegetable gardens up to a certain square footage, required they be maintained in good condition, but otherwise placed no restrictions on them. The changes passed with overwhelming support from the residents. The following spring, I was not the only one with vegetable planters. Susan Kelly planted tomatoes and peppers. A couple 2 streets over started a small herb garden. George got ambitious and planted green beans in his raised beds alongside the potatoes I was growing again. The neighborhood began to feel different, more connected and purposeful. The Franklin County Food Initiative featured Meadowbrook in a case study about how communities can support local food security. Janet Holloway came to one of our HOA meetings to talk about urban agriculture and answer questions. Several other residents signed up to participate in the Food Pantry Garden Network. By the end of that second growing season, 7 households in Meadowbrook were growing produce for donation. Together, we contributed over 600 pounds of fresh vegetables to local food pantries. The Grace Methodist Pantry, the one where the woman from the HOA meeting had said she relied on for her family, sent us a thank you letter with photos of families picking up their food boxes, which now regularly included fresh tomatoes, potatoes, peppers, squash, and herbs. Richard Chen turned out to be an excellent HOA president. He focused on what actually mattered, like maintaining common areas and organizing community events, rather than micromanaging everyone's landscaping choices. Under his leadership, Meadowbrook became a friendlier, more cohesive neighborhood. I ran into Officer Rodriguez one day at the grocery store, and he recognized me immediately. "The potato planter guy," he said with a smile. "How did everything turn out?" "Really well, actually. Brenda's gone. We changed the HOA rules and now a bunch of us are growing food for the pantries. It's become a whole community thing." "That's good to hear. I've responded to a lot of HOA disputes in my career, and most of them are ridiculous. It's nice when one actually ends positively." "Even if it took someone getting arrested to get there," I said wryly. "Sometimes that's what it takes." Some people can't see reason until they face real consequences. Looking back on the whole experience, I am struck by how something so simple, planting potatoes to help feed hungry people, could spiral into such conflict. Brenda's inability to see beyond her narrow view of how a neighborhood should look nearly destroyed what should have been a purely positive community initiative. But I am also heartened by how many people stood up once they understood what was really at stake. George offering his raised beds, Susan speaking up at that first meeting, Richard and the other board members refusing to support Brenda's vendetta, all the neighbors who started their own gardens the following year. Those were the people who defined Meadowbrook, not Brenda. The following year, The Franklin County Food Initiative awarded our neighborhood group a small grant to build a shared community garden on an unused common area near the clubhouse. We used the money to construct 10 raised beds and install a water system. Families signed up for plots, and we grew even more food for donation, plus allowed participants to keep some for their own use. I often think about that moment when Officer Rodriguez first pulled up to my house, and I thought my life was about to become incredibly complicated. It did become complicated, but not in the way I expected. I ended up part of something larger than just my 3 planter boxes. I helped change my community for the better, not just by growing vegetables, but by standing up for the principle that neighbors should support each other, not tear each other down over arbitrary rules. Brenda completed her community service hours at Grace Methodist Food Pantry. I never spoke to her during that time, but Janet Holloway told me the pantry director said Brenda was quiet and sullen, but did her work. I don't know if she ever gained the perspective Judge Hernandez hoped she would. Some people are incapable of admitting they were wrong. What I do know is that Meadowbrook is a better place now. Kids play in the streets while their parents tend garden beds. Neighbors share seeds and gardening tips. The food pantries we supply have fresh, nutritious produce grown with care by people who understand that being part of a community means contributing to something beyond your own property line. My potato planters are still there in my front yard, still neat and well-maintained, still producing. They've become something of a neighborhood landmark. New residents sometimes ask about them, and I tell them the story, usually in abbreviated form. The planters represent more than just food now. They represent what happens when someone refuses to be bullied for doing the right thing, and when a community decides to support positive change rather than resist it out of fear. Last month, I got an email from David Martinez at the Agricultural Department. He wanted to know if I would be willing to speak at a county workshop about urban agriculture and dealing with HOA restrictions. He said my story had inspired other people to start similar projects in their own neighborhoods, and some of them had questions about navigating the legal and community challenges. I agreed, of course. Standing in front of a room full of people who wanted to grow food for their communities, sharing what I learned from my experience, felt like the right way to honor everything that had happened. I talked about the legal protections that exist, the importance of documentation, and the need to build community support early. But mostly, I talked about why it matters. There are people in every community who don't have enough food, I told them. That's not a political statement, it's just a fact. And those of us who have the time, space, and ability to grow food have an opportunity to help. Yes, you might face resistance from HOAs or neighbors who don't understand. Yes, it might be frustrating and complicated. But at the end of the day, you'll be feeding people who need food. That's worth fighting for. The workshop ended with several people coming up to thank me and share their own stories. A woman from Dayton was facing similar HOA issues. A retired couple in Cleveland had converted most of their yard to vegetables and were donating to 3 different pantries. A young man in Cincinnati was starting an urban agriculture nonprofit and wanted advice on working with suburban communities. Driving home from that workshop, I felt a deep sense of satisfaction. What started as a simple desire to help my community had rippled outward in ways I never imagined. Brenda tried to stop me from planting potatoes, and instead she accidentally helped spark a movement. My lawyer Tom Fletcher called a few weeks later with news. "You're not going to believe this," he said. "Remember how Brenda settled your civil suit? Well, apparently she's now suing the HOA claiming they didn't properly support her and that their bylaws were too vague. Can she do that?" She can file the suit. She won't win. Richard and the board documented everything properly, and the HOA insurance will cover the legal defense. But it tells you something about her character that even after everything, she still thinks she's the victim. I'm just glad it's not my problem anymore. It's definitely not. But I wanted to let you know in case she tries to drag you into it somehow. I don't think she will, though. Her lawyer would have to be insane to put you on the stand after how the criminal trial went. The lawsuit went nowhere, as Tom predicted. Brenda eventually dropped it after her own lawyer apparently explained the concept of frivolous litigation and potential sanctions. I heard about it through the neighborhood gossip network and shook my head. Some people really never learned. This past spring marked 3 years since I planted my first potato. The Meadowbrook Community Garden is thriving, with a waiting list for plots. We donated over 1,000 pounds of fresh produce last year. The food pantries we work with have started requesting specific crops based on what their clients need most, and we coordinate our planting to meet those requests. George is still my gardening companion, though he's slowed down a bit. He mostly supervises now, sitting in his chair and offering advice while I do the heavy work. Martha brings us lemonade and homemade cookies. It's become a routine that feels as natural as anything I have ever done. Susan Kelly took over as HOA president when Richard stepped down after 2 years. She's even more progressive than Richard was, pushing initiatives around sustainability and community engagement. Under her leadership, Meadowbrook installed solar panels on the clubhouse and started a tool lending library so neighbors could share garden equipment and reduce waste. The neighborhood looks different now than it did when Brenda was in charge. There's more variety in the landscaping, more personality to individual properties. People express themselves through their gardens, some ornamental and some edible, all contributing to a sense that this is a living community of real people, not just a collection of identical houses trying to maximize theoretical property values. I still get emails sometimes from the Food Initiative connecting me with people who want advice on starting their own donation gardens. I always respond, sharing what I learned and encouraging them to persist even when they face resistance. Most people don't have to deal with anything as extreme as what I went through with Brenda, but almost everyone faces some kind of pushback or skepticism at first. The key, I tell them, is to stay focused on the mission. I wasn't planting potatoes to annoy my HOA or make a political statement. I was planting them to feed people who needed food. When you keep that purpose clear in your mind, it's easier to handle the obstacles that arise. Last week, I was working in my front yard when a young couple walked by with a baby stroller. They stopped to admire the planters, and we got to talking. They had just moved to Meadowbrook and were excited about the community garden program. "We heard this neighborhood does food donation gardening," the woman said. "That's actually one of the reasons we chose to buy here. We think it's amazing." I felt a surge of pride hearing that. The thing Brenda thought would destroy property values was now actually attracting buyers. People wanted to live in a community that cared about more than just lawn perfection. "There's still a waiting list for garden plots," I told them, "but you're welcome to use some space in my side yard if you want to get started now. I've got more room than I need." They gratefully accepted, and the following weekend we planted tomatoes and peppers together. Their baby gurgled happily in the stroller while we worked, and I thought about how this child would grow up in a neighborhood where growing food and helping others was just normal, not something to be punished or resisted. That evening, as I watered the new plants, I spotted a familiar car driving slowly past my house. It was Brenda. She stared at the planters and the garden that had expanded into my side yard. Our eyes met for a moment, and I saw something in her expression I couldn't quite identify. Regret, anger, resentment, maybe all three. Then she drove on, and I never saw her in Meadowbrook again. I went inside and opened my laptop to check messages from the food pantry coordinators. Grace Methodist needed green beans if anyone had extras. The Lutheran Pantry on 5th Street was looking for summer squash. The community center pantry wanted to know if we could grow some fresh herbs, which their clients had specifically requested. I forwarded the requests to the Meadowbrook Garden Network email list that Susan had set up. Within an hour, people had responded committing to provide everything that was needed. George emailed saying he had beans ready to harvest. A family I barely knew offered squash. 3 different people said they could bring herbs. This was what community was supposed to look like. Not rules and restrictions and fear of change, but people coming together to meet a need, to help others, to make their corner of the world a little bit better. My potato planters had started it all. 3 simple wooden boxes and a bag of seed potatoes. Brenda tried to turn them into a symbol of rebellion and disorder. Instead, they became a symbol of what's possible when people choose generosity over petness, community over conformity, and compassion over control. Every spring now, when I plant those first seed potatoes, I think about everything that happened. The police visits, the HOA meetings, the vandalism, the trial, all of it. And then, I think about the 1,000+ pounds of food we donated last year, the families who had fresh vegetables because of our community's efforts, and the neighborhood that came together around a shared purpose. I think about the other neighborhoods across Franklin County, and beyond that, started their own food donation gardens after hearing our story. I think about the kids learning where food comes from and the value of helping others. I think about the retirees who found new purpose in growing tomatoes for people they would never meet, but whose lives they touched nonetheless. Brenda called the cops on my potato planter, thinking it would shut me down. Instead, it ended up changing an entire community for the better. The agricultural department said I was planting for the local food pantry network, and they were right. But I was also planting seeds of something larger, a different way of thinking about neighborhoods and community, and what it means to be a good neighbor. Those seeds took root and grew into something beautiful, something that will outlast any HOA president's petty grievances. And that, more than any legal victory or personal vindication, is what makes me smile every time I look at those potato planters in my front yard. They're just plants growing in wooden boxes, really. But they're also proof that one person doing a small good thing can create change that ripples outward in ways you never expect. And sometimes, when someone tries to stop that good thing from happening, they accidentally make it bigger and more important than it ever would have been otherwise. So thank you, Brenda, wherever you are. You tried to destroy my potato planters, and instead you helped me transform my neighborhood. I could not have done it without you.